The first time I walked into Nona's table, Salvatore was a whirlwind, shouting into a phone in Italian with one hand, stirring 3 pots with the other, a towel thrown across his shoulder like a general's flag. The air smelled of garlic, olive oil and heat, an orchestra of chaos that somehow made sense. I remember thinking, if this man ever learns how to organize a fridge, he'll be unstoppable. He slammed the phone down, looked at me, sweat on his forehead, flour on his cheek, and said, "You here for the interview or to complain about the noise?" That was my introduction. No handshake, no small talk. "I'm Dennis," I said. "Frank's cousin. He told me you could use help with your books." He squinted, then grinned. "If you can find the books, you're hired." That was Salvatore. Bianchi. Messy, brilliant, impossible to ignore. Within an hour, I'd seen enough to know this man could make magic out of pasta, but could barely keep track of where his money went. Receipts stuffed in flour sacks, invoices used as coasters, and a ledger that looked like a grocery list written by a drunk poet still. The food was divine. Customers waited 40 minutes outside for his lasagna. He'd shout, sing, curse, and somehow charm every person in the room. And I, coming from years of fluorescent lit hardware aisles, felt something ignite in me again. That night, I stayed after closing. While Salvatore scrubbed pans, I spread invoices across the counter, sorting, labeling, organizing. He watched me for a long time before saying, "You work like someone who owns the place." I didn't answer. But in that moment, I think we both knew I wasn't just looking for a job. I was signing up for a life. The climb over, the next 20 years, I became his shadow. I learned every corner of that kitchen, the rhythm of knives, the hum of the old refrigerator, the squeak of the oven door that never quite closed. When Salvatore wanted to open a second restaurant, I was the one who told him how much he could afford. When health inspectors came, I was the one who smiled, offered them espresso, and quietly fixed whatever needed fixing before it became a violation. We built Bianchi Restaurant Group with sweat instead of capital. No investors, no fancy consultants, just Salvatore's fire and my calm. He used to joke, "I make the mess, Dennis cleans it." It was true, but I believed in him, in us, in the dream that maybe loyalty still meant something in business. By year 10, we had 4 locations. By year 15, 7. Every expansion was a battle, permits, landlords, burnt sauce, broken ovens, but somehow we made it. We became family. His children called me Uncle Denny. I taught his oldest, Rocco, how to drive stick shift. At staff parties, Salvatore would raise a glass and say, "Without Dennis, there is no Bianchi." I'd laugh, but a part of me believed him, because every time he looked tired, I'd take the shift. Every time he panicked about payroll, I'd cover it until cash flow caught up. My wife, Joanne, used to say, "You're married to that restaurant." She wasn't wrong, but it felt worth it until the day everything changed. The fallet was a Tuesday, always the quietest day. I came in early to review quarterly numbers. The new downtown location was bleeding money. I knew it. Salvatore knew it, but instead of discussing solutions, he called me into his office. The blinds were half closed. Rocco sat beside him in a suit that looked too expensive for his experience. I sensed the ambush before a word was spoken. "Dennis," Salvatore began, "you know, I love you like family, but we're going in a new direction. Rocco has modern ideas." He said, "Modern," like it meant disposable. I smiled politely, waiting for the real reason. He cleared his throat. "You've been with us 20 years. You've done more than anyone, but the board thinks it's time for fresh leadership." "The board," I repeated. There was no board. There was Salvatore, his wife, and Rocco, none of whom had ever spent a night unclogging a grease trap at 2 a.m. I felt my pulse slow, not from anger, but disbelief. He kept talking, something about restructuring, image, efficiency. But all I heard was 20 years collapsing into silence. When he finished, I nodded. Understood. That word cost me everything. By the time I reached the parking lot, my hands were shaking. Not from rage, just emptiness. I sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel, realizing I had nowhere to go that wasn't somehow tied to him. The bank 2 weeks later, I walked into First Federal Bank of Cleveland to close a credit line. My savings were almost gone. Unemployment. Paperwork sat unopened on my kitchen table. That's when a teller, young, polite, looked at her screen and frowned. "Sir, are you related to Eugene Farrow?" I nodded. He was my father. He passed away years ago. She hesitated. "Then, there's something here you should see." She disappeared into a back office and returned with a manila envelope. It was old, edges yellowed, my father's handwriting on the front. Inside was a single note. "Dennis, if you ever need a restart, ask for account 1445 EJP. Love, Dad." Attached was a small ledger. I opened it expecting a few $100s, maybe something sentimental. Instead, the balance line read 148,327.19. I stared, mouth dry. "Is this real?" I whispered. The teller smiled. "It accrued interest for a long time, sir. Your parents opened it in 1985. I almost laughed. My parents, people who reused paper towels, had somehow saved a fortune quietly, behind closed curtains, through decades of factory paychecks. And at that moment, sitting in that sterile bank lobby, I realized I'd spent my life managing someone else's dream while ignoring the quiet genius of two people who never needed applause to build their own. I just sat there staring at the screen as the numbers blinked back at me. 148,327. I'd never seen that much money in my name before. For a moment the room spun, the bank's air conditioning hummed softly. And in that white noise I swear I could hear my father's voice saying, "Don't ever waste what you work for, son." The teller excused herself, giving me privacy, and I just laughed under my breath. Of course, Mom and Dad would do this the quiet way. No life insurance, policy, no trust fund, just a ledger scribbled in pencil and a simple instruction: if you ever need a restart. They didn't believe in big gestures, they believed in slow miracles. I spent the next hour filling out forms, signing signatures that trembled a little. The banker, a middle-aged woman with reading glasses, told me the account had been untouched. For nearly 40 years, interest compounded every quarter. She said whoever set this up must have known what they were doing. I smiled. They did, I thought. They always did, even when I thought they were just ordinary people eating tuna sandwiches at the kitchen table. The letter at the bottom of the envelope was one more folded sheet. The paper was thin, like something torn from an old notepad. My mother's handwriting, round, neat, familiar, covered both sides. "Dennis, if you're reading this, your father and I are gone. Don't be sad. We had a good life. We couldn't give you much in gifts, but we tried to save something that might give you choices. If you want to know where it came from, look inside the brown tin in the attic." The brown tin. I remembered it. It sat on the top shelf of the old linen closet for as long as I could remember. Dad used it to keep spare screws, keys that didn't fit any door, and, apparently, a secret I wasn't ready for. The attic. That night I drove straight to the house on St. Clair Avenue. It had been empty for years since Mom died. The air smelled of dust and faint perfume. Every creak of the floor felt like a memory calling my name. The brown tin was still there, lid slightly rusted, dust thick on top. Inside were yellowed papers, 2 faded Polaroids, and a tiny notebook labelled EJP Holdings. For a second, I thought it might be something from Dad's factory days, retirement stocks maybe. But as I turned the first page, I froze. There, in Mom's careful handwriting, was a list of dates and small dollar amounts: $75, $120, and $250, every few months, starting in 1985. Beside each was a note: GE dividend, Ford drip, Lincoln, elect split. I blinked, confused, until it hit me. My parents hadn't been just saving money, they had been investing it. Not in mutual funds or fancy portfolios, but in the companies they worked for. They had been quietly buying dividend reinvestment shares every month, automatically, letting them grow for decades. No one ever talked about the stock market at our dinner table. Dad just used to say, "We buy a little piece of the place so it works for us when we're old." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. The shock eyes sat on the attic floor until my legs went numb, flipping through page after page. Each one told the same story: 2 factory workers using patience as their currency. When most people saw pennies, they saw seeds. They never sold, never touched a cent, even when times got hard. And now, 40 years later, those seeds had grown into a forest I never knew existed. In the tin's bottom corner lay an envelope with my name written on it in Dad's block letters. Inside was a single typed line: "If you're ever forced to start over, use this to build something of your own. Never again for someone else." That line hit me harder than losing the job ever did, because for 20 years I had built another man's empire brick by brick, believing loyalty would protect me. But my parents, who never once set foot in an office, had seen what I couldn't. That working for someone else's dream is safe, until it isn't. The flashback I remembered being 8 years old, standing in the driveway, as Dad washed his rusted Ford pickup. He handed me a quarter and said, "You know what this is, kid? It's part of $1 you haven't earned yet. You keep enough of these, they start working for you." I'd rolled my eyes. He chuckled. "You'll understand someday." 47 years later, I did. That night, sitting in the attic's half dark, I finally cried. Not out of sadness, but out of shame. Shame that I'd measured success in restaurant openings and monthly bonuses, while my parents measured it in patience and quiet strength. When I drove home, the city lights looked different. It wasn't Cleveland, it was a map of chances I'd ignored. For the first time in months, I felt something like peace. The next morning, I went back to the bank. I moved the money into a new account under the name Pharaoh Family Trust. It felt right, like closing a circle. Then I sat in my car, hands on the wheel, asking myself, what now? For most of my life, I'd only known how to build someone else's vision. But now maybe I could build my own. Not an empire, not 7 restaurants, just one small place that meant something. I didn't know what it would be yet, only that it had to honor them. Something humble, something made by hand. That's when I remembered Mom's kitchen, how she'd hum while stirring tomato sauce, the way the steam fogged her glasses, the smell of oregano on Sundays. And I knew what I wanted to build. Not another Italian restaurant, not a franchise, a community kitchen, small, honest, named after them. Opening day wasn't really an opening. There were no balloons, no ads, no ribbon to cut. Just me, a coffee pot, and a few chairs I'd sanded by hand. I flipped the sign from closed to open and waited. For the first hour, no one came. I didn't mind. The smell of fresh bread filled the place, and for the first time in months, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt peaceful. Around noon, the door creaked open. It was Mrs. Luca again, the waitress from Nona's table. She looked around, eyes wide. "This place feel familiar?" she whispered. I smiled. "It should. The recipes are my mother's." She sat down, hands folded. "Then bring me whatever she would have made on a Sunday." I served her tomato soup and half a grilled cheese, the same meal Mom used to make whenever money was tight. When she took the first bite, tears welled in her eyes. "This," she said softly, "tastes like kindness." That night I wrote those words on a napkin and pinned it behind the counter. Let everything we serve taste like kindness. The return word spread slower than I expected, but it spread. A few old co-workers stopped by. One brought their teenage son and said he wanted to see what real work looks like. A homeless veteran came in one rainy afternoon, asked for water, and left with a hot meal and a job washing dishes. By the end of the first month, Pharaoh's table wasn't just surviving, it was alive. Then one evening, as I was wiping down tables, I heard the bell over the door. I looked up, and there he was, Salvatore Bianchi. Older, thinner, wearing the same black leather jacket he'd worn when we first met 20 years ago. He smiled faintly. I smelled bread from down the street. Had to see who was baking it, I laughed. "You still exaggerate like a salesman." He sat, ordered coffee, and for 10 minutes, neither of us said a word. Then he looked around the little diner and said, "Your father would have been proud. You did what I never could. You made a business feel like home." There was no bitterness left between us, just two men who'd spent a lifetime building things, one for ambition, the other for meaning. Before he left, he slipped something onto the counter. "A folded note from Rocco," he said quietly. "He wanted you to have this." After he left, I opened it. Inside was a small check for $10,000 and a handwritten message for Pharaoh's table. "My father says your father fed his dream. Now let us feed yours." I didn't cry right away. I just stood there, staring at the handwriting of the son I once resented, realizing maybe the lesson had reached him too. The hidden ledger. A few nights later, while cleaning the storage closet, I found something I didn't recognize, a small box labeled "to be opened when you're ready." It must have been mixed in with my parents' old things when I moved them. Inside was a cassette tape and another note from my mother. "Dennis, if you found this, then you've finally slowed down long enough to listen. Play this tape." "Love, Mom." I still had my father's old cassette player in the garage. I wiped the dust off, pressed play, and heard her voice, faint, warm, steady. "Hi, sweetheart. If you're listening, you've probably had one of those days where you think the world's forgotten how hard you work. I just want to remind you, your father and I never saved money for things. We saved for moments. We knew you'd reach a point where you'd need to choose between bitterness and beginning again. So we built you a bridge, not just in dollars, but in lessons. Be kind, be curious. Be someone's restart, the way we tried to be yours." Her voice cracked slightly on the last line. And then Dad's voice joined in, rough but full of pride. "And remember, son, value isn't what something costs, it's what it gives back. When you're tired." The tape ended with silence and the soft click of the stop button. I sat there for a long time, head in my hands, tears soaking my sleeves. That was the moment I finally understood. The money wasn't the inheritance. The mindset was. The ripple months rolled by. Pharaoh's table became a quiet miracle in Cleveland. Truck drivers came at dawn, nurses after night shifts, Teachers grading papers in the corner booth. Sometimes we couldn't charge full price. Sometimes people left IOUs, but somehow the register always balanced. One winter night, I found a small note under a napkin at table 3. I came in tonight thinking of ending everything. Someone smiled at me when I walked in. "You gave me soup. Thank you for reminding me the world still has warmth." I kept that note in my wallet. It reminded me that success didn't have to look like 7 restaurants or awards. Sometimes success looked like one warm bowl of soup and a stranger deciding to keep going. The full circle, on the 1-year anniversary of Pharaoh's Table, I invited everyone who'd ever worked with me, even Salvatore and Rocco. We pushed tables together, laughed, shared stories about burnt bread and late nights. Someone asked me to make a toast. I stood, holding a chipped coffee mug instead of a champagne glass, and said, "My parents taught me that value isn't measured in what you earn, it's measured in what you pass forward." For years I thought I was helping build someone else's dream. Turns out they were building mine the whole time. So tonight, if you've ever felt forgotten, or too old, or too tired, this table is for you. You still matter. You always will. The room went quiet. Then someone started clapping. Then everyone did. And in that simple sound, applause bouncing off the walls of a diner that smelled like garlic and hope, I finally felt free. Epilogue. A few weeks later, I added one last photo to the wall behind the counter. It was the picture from that first Nona's Table opening. Me and Salvatore, covered in flour, laughing like idiots. Underneath, I wrote a new caption. "Some debts are repaid in time, others in love." Every night now, before I lock up, I whisper a quiet thank you to my parents, to the people who still believe in small kindnesses, to the customers who remind me that warmth can travel through generations. And as I turn off the lights, I can almost hear my father's voice one last time. "See, kid, I told you those quarters would start working for you someday." 3 weeks passed before I touched the money. It sat in that new account like something sacred, untouchable, humming quietly in the background while I stared at job boards and old photos. I told no one about it. Not my wife, not my son, not even my closest friend. Some part of me wanted to sit with the silence of it, to feel what my parents must have felt every payday they tucked away $20 instead of buying something nice. They'd been playing the long game while I chased short ones. Every morning I'd walk past the old Bianchi restaurant downtown. They'd already replaced my name on the office door with Director of Operations, Rocco Bianchi. A kid who thought loyalty was a punchline. Sometimes I'd stop across the street, coffee in hand, just watching through the window. Staff I'd trained now reporting to someone half my age, using systems I built. It didn't hurt anymore. It just felt like I'd finally woken up from a long, comfortable sleep. The spark one cold afternoon, I sat in my car eating a sandwich when an older woman knocked on my window. Her name was Mrs. Luca. She'd been a waitress at the first Nona's Table back in 2003. "Dennis Farrow, you disappeared on us," she said, smiling through the glass. I rolled the window down, surprised she even remembered me. "I got retired," I joked. She laughed. "They can't retire a man like you. You were the heart of that place." Her voice trembled a little when she said it. Then she sighed. "I miss those days. People came for food but stayed because you made them feel seen." That line stayed with me all night. People came for food but stayed because you made them feel seen. That's what I wanted to build again, a place that saw people, not a restaurant, a refuge EJP Holdings. The next day, I went back to that brown tin. Inside the little notebook labeled EJP Holdings, I noticed something I'd missed before. At the bottom of the last page, written in faint pencil, was a list of initials. EJP, Eugene, Dorothy, Pharaoh, SB, Salvatore Bianche, FM. Frank Marino, my stomach tightened. Salvatore's name, or at least his initials, were right there. I flipped through the next pages, suddenly seeing patterns I hadn't before. Small payments labeled joint investment, dates that lined up exactly with the year I started working for him. Could it be possible my father had invested with Salvatore decades before I even met him? I called Frank Marino, my cousin, the same one who introduced me to Salvatore 20 years ago. He answered on the second ring. Frank, did you ever know about some investment my dad and Salvatore did together? Frank went quiet. Then he said softly, "So, you found it, huh?" I froze. "You knew?" he sighed. "Not everything. Just that back in the 80s your dad lent Salvatore a few thousand to open his first pizzeria. Salvatore wanted to pay him back, but your father refused. Said, 'Just promise me you'll look after my boy someday.'" My throat closed. So it was true. The empire I helped build had been planted with my father's money, and all those years Salvatore never said a word. The visit. The next morning, I drove to Salvatore's office. Same mahogany panels, same family photos, same espresso machine humming like it owned the place. Rocco wasn't there, just Salvatore, sitting behind, his desk looking older than I remembered. When he saw me, he stood up slowly. "Dennis," he said carefully, "I didn't expect—" "I know about the loan," I interrupted. He blinked. "The loan?" "From my father. 1985, the one that helped you start Nona's Table." Silence. Then his shoulders dropped. He sat back down, rubbed his face with both hands. "Your father saved my life," he said quietly. "I was broke, Dennis. No bank would lend to me. He came to the garage one night with 3 envelopes. Said, 'Use this, but promise you'll feed people the way you'd feed family.' He looked up at me, eyes wet. And I promised. But I never told you, because I thought it would make you feel like you were only here because of him." I swallowed hard. "All those years you knew, and when you fired me—" "I didn't fire you, Dennis," he cut in. "I thought I was freeing you. You were too loyal for your own good. You built my dream better than I did. I wanted to be angry, but I couldn't." Because behind the regret in his voice was something I hadn't heard in a long time. Truth. He leaned forward. "You know what your father told me that night?" He said, "When my boy grows up, he's going to save your dream. You'll owe him everything." He was right. I sat there in stunned silence. The man I thought betrayed me had actually been carrying my father's promise for 40 years. The plan Salvatore opened a drawer and slid a small envelope across the desk. "I was going to mail this to you," he said. Inside was a check, not a token amount, but $112,000. I stared at it. He continued, "It's what your father invested, adjusted for inflation and interest. It's yours now. Use it for something that's yours." I pushed it back toward him. "I already have enough. My parents left me something." He smiled faintly. "Then maybe use it to feed others, the way they fed me." That was the first time in months I felt my chest lighten. Not because of money, but because of clarity. Everything I'd built, everything I'd lost, suddenly made sense. My parents hadn't just saved money, they'd invested in people, and maybe that's what I was supposed to do next. The idea driving home that night, I passed an old abandoned diner with boarded-up windows and a faded sign that still read, "Open 24 hours." Something about it spoke to me, not as a business opportunity, but as a place that could hold stories, warmth, and second chances. The next morning, I called the number on the "For Lease" sign. The rent was cheap, the kitchen was outdated, perfect. I spent weeks cleaning, repairing, painting, doing it all myself, just like my parents would have. No investors, no grand opening, no press. Just one sign out front. Pharaoh's table, everyone has a seat.